Resident Evil 4 Remake is hands down the best game I've played in months. It tells a compelling, if not over-the-top story of Leon working through his feelings and responsibilities after Racoon City by shooting parasite zombie monsters and quipping. It's a masterful mix of horror and humour, with neither managing to undercut the other, and has all of the spectacle of Resident Evil 3's boss fights, with the interactivity and mechanics actually implemented in a meaningful way. Every element, from the characters to the sound to the environment to the combat, all managed to merge together to create the most cohesive, interesting and complete narrative out of the 3 remakes.
I'll let myself out.
I really enjoyed Resident Evil 4. Not only was it the one I spent the longest on, but it was also the first game so far that didn't feel like it was missing something. It felt from start to finish to be a complete experience that I didn't need to go online to try and find out what they cut. I'm still assuming that they cut or changed things, but this remake does such a good job that I was never feeling the need to go and see what was done differently in the original. Don't get me wrong, there's still flaws in the game. I think that splitting it up into the strict chapter definitions was a misstep, and that a lot of the behind the scenes loading could have been done during the cutscenes that start and end most of the chapters. It also makes the save points right at the start of each chapter pointless, and it feels like at one point they weren't going to have the chapter splits but then decided for it. Yet, even with that, I can understand why. The world changes states in the chapter loading and brings in and out different areas of the map so that the player isn't entirely overwhelmed or moving in the wrong direction. It's different to RE3 in that all the maps are still open and have a lot of space for exploration, but solves a minor issue of RE2, the feeling of being lost. RE4 is the perfect middle ground with these chapter splits because it means you can't consistently backtrack to get the things you missed, which means that leaving an area has more weight than before because it will more probably than not be the last time you can get there easily. There are still hub areas like the village centre as well as the castle ballroom entrance area thingy, but these don't act like the lobby of the police station, rather just another step in your journey with a few treasures to collect. The chapters also give a true pace to the game, unlike anything RE2 or 3 did before it, and give the story a much more solid structure than both entries. You're not ambling around and then run across the story, you're collecting treasures and doing side missions before finally feeling ready enough to move on to the next zone. If you couldn't tell how much I loved it before, then you do now, because my largest complaint turned into an analysis of how it actually makes the game better. Speaking of better, the combat. Good lord, it's miles ahead of what they were doing in the RE3 remake. There is still a little bit of jank when it comes to dodging, but simplifying it down to a contextual QTE means that it's much easier to actually dodge attacks than it was with the sidestepping mechanic, which hardly ever worked as intended. It also means that you can have a much larger selection of weapons as well, because they've totally overhauled the gunplay and how shooting works, so that weapons like handguns and rifles have a much different feel in reloading time and damage, but also all of that is communicated to the player through both simple numbers as well as how long it takes to kill an enemy. Ammo is also simplifies into easy to digest categories. Rather than 9mm, it's just handgun or shotgun or magnum. It's a small change, but something that made the readability at a glance much easier, and removed a lot of the tedium. It's a much smoother experience than the last 2 remakes, and I assume light years ahead of the original, even if I still haven't played it. The sick fucks over at Capcom also added in the best mechanic to any game I've possibly played, the knife. This thing is insane, ridiculous, brilliant and hilarious all at once. You can use it to sneak up on enemies and stab them from behind, and you can also use it to just stab enemies normally when you've staggered them. It's useful in stopping enemies coming back as a more powerful version, but it can also be used to stop an enemy grab, similarly to Resident Evil 2 Remake. Then, the best feature of all of this insanity: parry. You can parry anything, and I really do mean anything, because you can parry the little axes, you can parry things in midair, and you can parry an entire fucking chainsaw, because this game is a masterpiece. Chainsaw Sisters got too close? No worries, just use your normal regular knife to parry them. It's a beautiful mechanic that I never used enough because I was getting used to it. But then it introduces Krauser, and you have this massive epic knife battle showdown with him, and it's so tense and like an action 80s movie cliche, and also taking itself super seriously. And have I mentioned that it's all brilliant and amazing? Because it is. I haven't even mentioned all of the smaller things they added to the game, like the treasure system and all the different gems and how you can inlay them into different artifact things in a little mini game where you can triple the money you get if you do it in a specific pattern. That took up a lot of my time because I wanted all the little things. There are also a lot of locked chests and puzzle chests where you need specific items in a very old school RE2 Metroidvania fashion, going back to previous areas with new keys to get the new treasure. And the merchant, what are you buying?
Ooh, what you buying?
Haven't even mentioned him and all the different weapons and items and attachments you can get from him, as well as his requests, which are little side quest elements to getting extra currency you can trade in. He also has a whole ass shooting range mini game where you can get these awesome little charms that increase ammo crafting game or decrease shop costs. There's just so much to do in this amazing game that if I talk too much about all the awesome stuff they added for you to do in and around the game, I'd never have time for the actual story. Which would be doing a massive disservice to it because it's one of my favourite Resident Evil stories right now. You're once again Leon Kennedy, which is great because I love Leon. Actually, I've loved all of the main characters. Jill and Claire are great. Either way, you're back as Leon after his time in Racoon City and he's trying very hard to be an emo sad boy. But that quickly goes away with all of his quips and humour.
Sorry, didn't realize that was yours.
It never came through that much in RE2 for me, but RE4 gave Leon a personality, and where stuff like this happens to him on the regular and he's tired of it by now. His mission, which seemed like he had no choice to accept, is to save the president's daughter from a Spanish cult. And by the end of the first chapter, you've already stepped in 50 bear traps and gotten the motivation you need to kill every single one of these cult members. But beyond that, you're also infected with Las Plagas. Plagas? Whatever. And now, you must cure yourself before you become just another member of the cult. It was fairly tense, even if I knew they weren't going to kill Leon off. There was some genuine worry that something bad could happen at any moment. Especially when Ashley was involved as well, and clearly not faring as well against the Plagas. She was not a straight-up damsel in distress, and they've clearly made some choices to give her not only more agency, but more usefulness with how she is in the game. She's not a combat character, which makes sense since I assume she's supposed to be a teenager. It's hard to tell, but she's supposed to be young at the very least. Either way, in combat, you need to keep her far from the enemies attacking, or they'll snatch her and you need to make sure she isn't taken. This only happened to me once during a bullshit sequence, and it wasn't too hard to manage, but that's because I like to kill everything rather than run through them, and also because Ashley isn't around for the entire game. She gets captured in cutscenes a lot, and it's more about getting back to her than making sure she gets around the levels. Aside from that, you have some fairly great new side characters like Luis, and some amazing bosses. Now, I will say, I used a lot of my money to buy the rocket launcher and one-hit the bosses. Not because I'm bad at games, mainly because I thought it would be funny. And it was. El Gigante was the first boss I used it on, and I thought this was a permanent thing. Even so, I bought the other two I could get and used them on Ramon and Stage 1 Sada, which was incredibly satisfying and hilarious. Though there was a moment where I thought Sada just shrugged off the rocket and I'd actually have to fight him. Either way, the bosses I did fight were bloody amazing. Del Lago, Menendez, the Verdugo were all amazing fights. Some minor enemies stuck out as well, like the Chainsaw Sisters, the Garrador, and the Regenerator, all gave me enough pause for me to consider them mini-bosses.
What the fuck are you?
Though the best one was clearly Krauser. His first fight was this intense dance where he fights you in this awesome night fight. But his second fight is something straight off to Rambo, before turning into this all-out Resident Evil mutant battle. It's so overly dramatic and beautifully written in the most camp way that it by far took the cake for me. Leon stabbing Krauser right after their fight, and Krauser finally calling his name.
I dreamed well. Leon.
Beautiful. It's a masterpiece. In the end, Leon is saved by Ada, and then by Ashley, and then by Ada again. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention Ada's in this. Ada's in this again, and she has her own DLC, which I played, and I'll do a whole separate video on. You get the whole blow up with a rocket launcher thing again, which was just as satisfying as the first time with Mr. X. And then you get to do a whole fucking jet ski escape sequence with a big old ticking clock. It's this incredible scripted moment with all these rocks falling and these explosions as this facility crumbles around Leon and Ashley, both cured of the Plagas and finally escaping. There are so many cinematic moments in this game that I'd love to highlight because this game is quality from top to bottom, but the jet ski escape sequence is the perfect cap because it allows you to slightly relax and enjoy this explosion bonanza. Whew. God, what a game. What a time. Leon and Ashley ride off into the sunset. Ada gets Amber for her mystery client. Luis gets his redemption. It's cliche, but it's just so well done that you can't be mad. And even if this is the height of the franchise, the best it ever gets, I'm still in for the rest of them, because what a height it reaches.
I said, come in. Is this thing even on? Leon, are you and Ashley all right? Where are you? Come on!